In 1398, the walls of Delhi trembled. More than 100,000 war prisoners, captured during weeks of relentless campaigning, waited in chains across the fields surrounding the city. What happened on that November day shocked even medieval chroniclers. Tamerlane, the conqueror of the steppes, ordered their execution before dawn. There were no trials. There was no mercy. Within hours, Delhi was surrounded by mountains of bodies. And this was only the beginning. When the city surrendered, the looting lasted 15 days. What remained was no longer a city, it was a carcass. And here is the detail that makes it all the more disturbing. Tamerlane was a learned man who recited the Quran from memory, played chess at a master level, and wept when he heard music. How can a single man contain such contradiction? This is the story of Timur, the most devastating conqueror humanity has ever produced. The 14th century was an era of collapse and opportunity. The Black Death had devastated Eurasia between 1347 and 1353, killing up to 50 million people. Great empires lay in ruins. The Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan, which a century earlier had unified Asia, had splintered into 4 rival khanates. The Abbasid Caliphate, destroyed by the Mongols in 1258, was a shadow of its former self. And at the heart of this fragmentation, a region called Transoxiana, between the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers, in what is today Uzbekistan, seethed with competing Turkish and Mongol tribes. It was in this crucible that, in 1336, in the city of Kesh, a boy was born to the Barlas tribe. His father, Taragai, was a minor chieftain, wealthy enough to educate his son, but without the political weight to protect him. This boy would grow up to be called Timur ibn Taragai Barlas. The world would know him as Tamerlane, a Persian corruption of Timur-Ilang, Timur the Lame. Timur was born into a Turco-Mongol family that claimed, possibly opportunistically, descent from Genghis Khan. Raised as a Sunni Muslim, he was educated in the Quran and the arts of war from childhood. But an incident in his youth would define both his body and his psychology. Around 1362, while rustling sheep during a period of tribal unrest, he was struck by arrows in the right shoulder and right knee. He survived, but was left permanently lame and with a weakened right arm. Far from concealing this limitation, Tamerlane incorporated it into his identity as an undefeated warrior. Chroniclers noted that he used his physical disability as proof that he had been tested and chosen by God. In the steppe culture, where physical strength determined hierarchy, Timur built authority through other means: exceptional strategic intelligence, brutal charisma, and an almost supernatural capacity to recover from defeat. Timur's rise to power between 1360 and 1370 was a masterwork of betrayal and strategic alliance. He began as a subordinate of Hussein, chief of the Chagatai Khanate, even marrying the man's sister. Together they reconquered Transoxiana from rivals. But Timur knew Hussein would become an obstacle. In 1370, after a series of wars and political maneuvers, Timur cornered Hussein in the city of Balkh and captured him. Hussein was killed by personal enemies. Timur conveniently did not intervene. On April 10, 1370, at age 34, Timur was proclaimed sovereign of Samarkand and all Transoxiana. To legitimize his rule within Mongol tradition, he never used the title of Khan. He was not a direct descendant of Genghis. Instead he took the title of Emir, military ruler, and married a princess of Genghis Khan's bloodline so his sons would carry the sacred lineage. An elegant solution to a legitimacy problem. Between 1370 and 1390, Tamerlane consolidated his domain through methodically brutal campaigns. In 1379, he conquered Khorasan in northeastern Iran. In 1380, he subjugated Afghanistan. Between 1382 and 1385, he swept through the entire Persian Empire. But it was during the 3-year campaign, from 1386 to 1388, that the world began to understand what he truly was. In Azerbaijan, Persia, and Christian Georgia, cities that resisted were completely destroyed. Timur developed a grim system of escalation. Cities that surrendered immediately were spared. Cities that resisted and then capitulated paid heavy tributes but survived. Cities that fought to the last were sacked, their inhabitants massacred. And to mark his path, Timur left unmistakable signs, towers built from the skulls of the defeated, sometimes cemented with clay so they would remain standing for years. It was an architectural message of terror. What chroniclers recorded about Timur is unsettling in its complexity. Physically, he was tall for his era, estimated at around 5 feet 7 inches, stocky, with gray hair in maturity and light eyes that made an impression in accounts. He walked with a visible limp but projected a presence that made stronger men bow. Spanish ambassador Ruy González de Clavijo, who visited him in 1404, described an elderly man of simple appearance, without extravagant jewelry, who received visitors reclining on cushions, yet whose gaze was like that of a lion. Timur was multilingual. He spoke Turkish, Persian, and likely understood Arabic. He was obsessed with chess, which he credited with teaching him military strategy. He collected craftsmen, architects, and scholars from conquered cities. Rather than killing specialists, he transported them to Samarkand. The city became one of Asia's most splendid capitals, filled with monuments built by Persian, Indian, and Chinese architects taken captive during his wars. Tamerlane navigated a world of rival powers with diplomatic mastery. His principal enemies were three: the Golden Horde to the north, led by Toktamish, paradoxically a former ally whom Timur had placed on the throne before he turned enemy, the Delhi Sultanate to the southeast, immensely wealthy but militarily weakened, and the Ottoman Empire to the west, the era's greatest military power in the Islamic world. Among allies, Timur cultivated relations with Christian Europe, especially with King Charles VI of France and with the Pope, who saw Timurid power as a barrier against the Ottoman Turks. In 1402, Tamerlane and Henry IV of England even exchanged diplomatic correspondence. He was a man who understood that power was not merely about conquest, it was about being recognized as power by the world. But his most personal relationship was with Toktamish. He had saved the man from exile, placed him on a throne, and then spent an entire decade hunting him across northern Eurasia in exhausting wars. The year 1398 marked the point at which Tamerlane stopped being a regional conqueror and became a civilizational force on a historical scale. His invasion of India was triggered by a religious pretext. He claimed the Delhi Sultans, themselves Muslim, were too tolerant of Hindus. But the truth was more pragmatic. Delhi was the wealthiest city in the Eastern Islamic world, and Timur needed riches to finance future wars. With an army estimated at 90,000 cavalry, he crossed the Indus River in September 1398. Vanguard units swept through the Punjab. As he approached Delhi, Timur faced the campaign's greatest psychological challenge. Sultan Mahmud Tughlaq's army deployed armored war elephants carrying towers of archers. His own officers expressed fear of the elephants. Timur responded with a solution that demonstrates his military genius. He loaded camels with straw, set them on fire, and drove them toward the elephants. Flaming animals in a panic. The elephants stampeded and trampled their own troops. The climax of Delhi's conquest lasted only hours, but its consequences endured for decades. After crushing the Sultan's army on December 17, 1398, Timur entered the city. The sack that followed was a violence so extreme that even Timurid chroniclers recorded it with horror. For 15 days, soldiers killed, looted, and burned. Estimates suggest between 100,000 and 200,000 people died in the sack alone. The towers of skulls erected around Delhi were visible for miles. Timur departed carrying the wealth accumulated by the Delhi Sultanate over generations: gold, precious stones, war elephants, craftsmen, artists. The historian Ibn Arab Shah, writing decades later, calculated that Delhi took a century to recover its population. There was no food for survivors. No construction for 2 years. The city that had been the center of Islamic power in the Indian subcontinent had been transformed into ruins inhabited by crows. The world's reaction to the horror of Delhi was the silence of the powerless. No force in the Islamic world was capable of confronting Tamerlane. The Abbasid Caliphate had been destroyed by the Mongols in 1258. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt was distant and weakened. The Ottomans, then led by the bellicose Sultan Bayezid I, nicknamed the Thunderbolt, watched from the west with growing concern. In Christian Europe, the reaction was a cautious opportunism. Perhaps this steppe monster could be a providential ally against the Turks. As for India, the shock was traumatic and lasting. Local sultans who had considered resistance quickly sent emissaries with tribute. Timur departed India in March 1399, but not before sacking Punjab cities on the return journey. When he crossed the Ganges, he brought with him camels laden with gold and 90 captured war elephants, which were later used in the construction of the Grand Mosque of Samarkand. Returning from Delhi with unimaginable riches, Tamerlane immediately turned west, for there were still more conquests to be made. Between 1399 and 1401, he conducted what became known as the 7-Year Campaign. In 1400, he conquered the Syrian city of Aleppo, sacked Damascus, and threatened Cairo. The Mamluk Sultan retreated without fighting. In July 1401, he captured Baghdad, for the second time in his life, as he had already conquered the city in 1393. This time, he was more methodical in destruction. Medieval estimates speak of 90,000 skulls used to build 120 towers around the city. Mosques, libraries, and hospitals were burned. The irrigation system that made Mesopotamia fertile was destroyed, damage that would take centuries to reverse. The historian Ibn Khaldun, one of the greatest medieval Islamic scholars, traveled personally to Timur's camp to negotiate safe passage for travelers. In his memoirs, he described a man of overwhelming intelligence, and without a trace of compassion. The numbers of Tamerlane's destruction defy modern comprehension. Contemporary historians, such as demographer Matthew White, estimate Timur's wars caused between 15 and 17 million deaths, approximately 5% of the world's population at the time, equivalent to killing 400 million people in today's world. Iran lost roughly 2/3 of its population in some regions. Mesopotamia took centuries to recover agricultural fertility. Northern India remained demographically devastated for decades. But there were survivors, and not just anonymous victims. Timur had the peculiar habit of preserving artists, architects, craftsmen, and intellectuals. The Persian school of illuminated manuscripts that flourished in Herat under his descendants used artists displaced by his wars. The musician who played for him while he shouted massacre orders. The architect from Isfahan who designed Samarkand's monuments after witnessing the destruction of his own home city. These preserved lives within the machine of destruction remain the most disturbing paradox in the entire story of Tamerlane. In 1402, Tamerlane marched west toward the greatest confrontation of his life, battle against Bayezid I, the Ottoman Sultan, the man who had captured the Byzantine emperor and threatened Constantinople itself. The two men had exchanged diplomatic insults for years. Bayezid called Timur an ignorant Mongol. Timur responded by calling Bayezid a tyrant who persecutes Muslims. In July 1402, their armies met near Ankara in central Turkey. The Ottoman army was estimated at 85,000 men, the most powerful force in Europe and the Mediterranean. Timur's army likely exceeded 140,000. The Battle of Ankara lasted one day. Timur had previously bribed commanders of Anatolian tribes within the Ottoman army. In the middle of the battle, entire divisions changed sides. Bayezid was personally captured by Timur, the first time an Ottoman sultan had been taken prisoner in battle. The thunderbolt had been extinguished. The Ottoman defeat at Ankara triggered a geopolitical earthquake felt from Cairo to London. Bayezid I died in captivity in March 1403, 8 months after his capture. Stories about his treatment as a prisoner vary dramatically. Contemporary European sources claim Timur used him as a footstool when mounting his horse and kept him in an iron cage. Modern historians question this narrative, likely created or exaggerated to emphasize Islamic humiliation. Timurid and Ottoman sources closer to the event suggest Bayezid was treated with relative dignity, though clearly in captivity. What is undeniable is that the Ottoman defeat delayed the fall of Constantinople by 50 years. The Ottoman Empire plunged into an 11-year civil war among Bayezid's sons, the Ottoman interregnum, from 1402 to 1413. Constantinople, the last Christian capital in the East, survived until 1453 thanks, paradoxically, to the most devastating Islamic conqueror of the medieval era. Tamerlane's death on February 18, 1405 was almost comically ironic. He was marching to conquer China. With an army of 200,000 men, he planned to overthrow the Ming dynasty, which had just expelled the Mongols from China. It was an absurdly ambitious conquest for a 68-year-old man. The winter on the plains of what is now Kazakhstan was brutal. Timur fell ill, likely from pneumonia, during the march and died in the city of Otra before reaching the Chinese border. His body was transported back to Samarkand, embalmed with musk and amber, and interred in the magnificent Guryamir mausoleum he had commissioned for his beloved grandson. In 1941, Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb and examined the remains, confirming the injury to the right knee and shoulder that had given rise to the nickname Timurilang. Legend holds that an inscription on the sarcophagus read, "When I rise, the world shall tremble." 3 days after the tomb was opened, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. Tamerlane's legacy shaped the world in ways we still feel today. His defeat of the Ottomans in 1402 delayed the fall of Constantinople by 51 years, preserving the Byzantine Empire, and consequently allowing Greek scholars to flee to Italy with classical manuscripts that fueled the European Renaissance. His grandson Ulu Beg, who ruled Samarkand from 1411 to 1449, built an astronomical observatory that produced star catalogues more accurate than anything in Europe before the 17th century. Timur's great-grandson Babur founded the Mughal Empire in India in 1526, which ruled the subcontinent for over 300 years and is responsible for monuments such as the Taj Mahal. The destruction of the Mesopotamian irrigation system by Timur contributed to Iraq's economic decline that lasted until the 20th century. And Samarkand, the city enriched with the blood of millions, remains one of the jewels of Islamic architecture, a UNESCO World Heritage Site visited by tourists from around the globe. The story of Tamerlane raises questions that haunt us to this day. How do we judge a man who killed 17 million people, yet whose descendants built the Taj Mahal? How do we understand a ruler who burned libraries in the morning and funded poets at night? In modern Uzbekistan, Tamerlane is a national hero. Statues of him stand in Tashkent, the capital, and his face appears on local currency. Dictator Islam Karimov, who governed Uzbekistan from 1991 to 2016, deliberately used Timur's image as a symbol of national identity. It is the same phenomenon seen in other nations where bloody conquerors are elevated to heroes, the need for national narratives that justify borders and power. Tamerlane also became a literary and theatrical character in Europe. Christopher Marlowe's play, Tamerlane the Great, premiered in London in 1587 to enormous success, presenting the conqueror as a fascinating anti-hero. Our fascination with the intelligent destroyer endures. Timur ibn Taragai died in 1405, having never been defeated in battle. In 35 years of uninterrupted campaigning, he built the second largest empire ever seen in Asia, smaller only than that of Genghis Khan, his model and obsession. But unlike Genghis, whose empire endured for generations, Timur's fragmented within decades. What survived was Samarkand, the city of blue tiles and golden domes that he filled with the plunder of a continent. And what survived was the question his life poses to history: how far does the human capacity for destruction extend? And how is it possible that from destruction, beauty is born? Tamerlane was neither a monster without reason nor a hero without stain. He was something more unsettling, a human being in the full range of his capacity, for conquest, for cruelty, for culture, and for contradiction. His story is not a simple warning. It is an uncomfortable mirror. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories.